Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. It's another Word Balloon at 15, and unfortunately, I was planning on promoting these conversations anyway, but now I have to do it in the shadow of his departure from DC Comics. It's the history of Dan DiDio. Dan, in our conversations that you'll hear, we talk about his pre-comics work at ABC, doing a lot of work in daytime television and Saturday morning cartoons, when there was such a thing as Saturday morning cartoons. I can't believe they've been gone. I'm as old as Saturday morning cartoons. They debuted the year I was born. It was an institution for almost 50 years, and it went away. But unfortunately, like Dan spent a good 20 years at DC, and we didn't have a lot of conversations past 2009 on the record. I certainly saw him at a lot of conventions, and I'll talk about the current news. But like him or not, and agree or disagree with some of the big initiatives he made, you cannot deny the footprint that Dan DiDio left at DC Comics in those 20 years. Think of all the events he was involved with: Infinite Crisis and 52. And then, moving on, certainly there were more events after 52, but the big ones, like the New 52. And also, DC Rebirth. He was in charge of all that stuff. And yeah, I had my doubts sometimes about some of these events. Not a fan of Convergence. Really kind of an event I'm still scratching my head at. I'll even be honest, I'm not a fan of what has been telegraphed in terms of where this 5G plan is going. Especially flying in the face of a new Superman Lois Lane TV show on CW and a Robert Pattinson Batman Bruce Wayne movie. I thought it was interesting, and I thought it was cool when I had heard rumors that Michael B. Jordan might be playing Superman. And I'm like, well, that'll work. I mean, he's an alien, and also, yeah, any race could play Superman. As we're speaking, Red Sun has just come out, the animated adaptation of Mark Millar's amazing story that James DeMatteis adapted for the animation. Can't wait to watch it. Haven't done it yet. But regardless, you've got to give Dan credit, not only for the events, but also cultivating the DC Nation. I mean, literally, he was the cheerleader and built the community before Facebook, before Twitter, before MySpace. Dan was out there saying, let's gather all the DC, fans and put them all together and cheer about DC the way the Marvel fans cheer about Marvel. And I think he succeeded in all that. So I hope you'll enjoy these conversations with Dan, spanning from my first conversation with him on the record to the last. Some of those are convention floor talks. Yes, I do my Dan DiDio imitation. I can't help it. That was, seriously, this is why I like Dan. He knew it was, all in good fun, and he was a good sport about it. And that immediately made Dan, somebody that I really look forward to seeing at every show. I'll be honest, when Rebirth was announced and I was at the Retailer Summit, I wasn't necessarily, right away saying, is this going to work? Because I happened to notice, and it's easy to connect the dots, some writers who had failed in the New 52 were still writing the same characters in Rebirth. And I'm like, Dan, why is that happening? Why is that going to work now when it clearly didn't work in the last iteration? And his answer was, well, we've got these writers under contracts. I still think it's a good fit. Okay, whatever. Again, he's the boss. But yeah, I'm sorry to see him go. And I hope there are no scandals that tie to this. I don't believe so. Again, Dan's been a straight-up guy ever since I met him. And I have a lot of respect for him as a person and as a creative. So I hope you'll enjoy these conversations with Dan DiDio, the history of Dan DiDio, as I call this episode, on today's Word Balloon. Brought to you by my group, my posse, the League of Word Balloon listeners. Yes, no greater superhero team has ever been assembled for such a cause as Word Balloon's League of Word Balloon listeners. I know I've lately been saying, grab your domino mask and cape. I should do that. I should, and I'll in some way, maybe some virtual way, send everybody, all my patrons at Patreon, domino masks and capes. And, not physical ones. I don't have the money for that. But it's getting better, and Word Balloon continues to expand because of the support of the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thanks a lot, League. I can't do it without you. WordBalloon.com. Click on the Patreon ad. or just go directly to patreon.com/wordballoon, and you'll go to my Patreon page. Is Word Balloon worth $1 a month to you? Is it worth the price of a comic book a month to you? I'm trying to put out a lot of episodes and give you a lot of conversation to enhance your enjoyment of comic books, film, television, pop culture, nerd culture in general. Thank you again, League of Word Balloon listeners. This episode also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. Great stuff coming from Aftershock. John Layman's The Man Who Effed Up Time debuted this month. And really looking forward to Stephanie Phillips' brand new book, Artemis and the Assassins, coming in March. There's other great new books as well, like God Killers by Mark Sable and Zach Thompson's Undone by Blood. They'll be heading to the Aftershock shelf to sit right next to Animosity from Marguerite Bennett and Raphael De La Tour, and Baby Teeth with Donny Cates and Gary Brown, A Walk Through Hell from Garth Ennis and Gordon Suzuka, Dark Arc from Cullen Bunn and Juan Doe, Dark Red from Tim Seeley. Paul Jenkins has great Aftershock books. So many of my friends do. Great talents. And Aftershock was smart enough to pick them up and have them do books for them. Check out their website. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages of art, and the way to get these books to your stores through the diamond codes at AftershockComics.com. All right, let's start things off with my first conversation with Dan on the record from 2006. It got into, again, Dan's background, getting involved with DC, his friendship with Jimmy Palmiotti, which led to them co-writing Superboy, some pitches at Marvel that didn't happen, some other ideas that didn't necessarily happen at DC as well. You'll find that a lot in a lot of these conversations. Ideas that maybe didn't necessarily happen, but they were things that Dan was thinking about at the time. So let's start off with my first conversation with Dan from 2006 here on Word Balloon. Welcome back to WordBalloon.com, the comic book conversation show. This is John Suntress. Today, a talk with Dan DiDio, the executive editor of DC Comics. DiDio's tenure at the top of DC has been both a time of change and returning to the status quo, getting concepts and characters back to basics, like Supergirl, Green Lantern, and Batman, to killing older characters and rebooting the concepts as new properties. There have been big changes in the DCU thanks to events like Identity Crisis, Infinite Crisis, and the weekly series 52. Fan reactions, both positive and negative, have resulted in one clear direction. People are buying the books, interested to see what happens next in the DC universe. While the huge changes in the DC status quo have angered a lot of fans, one thing can't be denied. DiDio has fulfilled his promise to readers. The monthly books matter and deliver in their shocking plot developments. Waiting for the trade has gotten a lot harder when we hear what might happen next. We'll take a look at some of the editorial decisions Dan has made and his enthusiastic look ahead for DC in 2007. But first, our conversation begins with a look at Dan's television career and the steps that led to DC. I'm curious about your background in terms of running a writer's room. Is it fair to say that's what you were doing at ABC when you were running daytime television in a certain respect?
When I was doing two different things. Daytime television, I was doing publicity.
Okay.
So what I would do then is I was handling the publicity for three of the New York-based soap operas at the time, which is All My Children, One Life to Live, and Loving, which was the third show coming out in New York at that time.
Okay.
That's what I was working on to start with. And then what happened is that I moved out to Los Angeles, and I actually was running the day-to-day operations for the ABC Saturday morning schedule.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't much as running the writer's room as it was running the schedule, and I was a program exec on a number of the shows that were taking place at the time.
How does that equate with what you do currently at DC?
Well, I was always a long-time comic fan.
Okay.
You know, I've been reading comics since I was 12 years old, so it's you know, I've been reading for a long number of years. And even though I was working in television even though I worked in television for about 26 years, I always found a way to work comics into my business, comics into my job. And, you know, whether it was, you know, finding a couple of comic professionals that were soap opera fans and giving them tours. There was even a day that I had worked out a deal between All My Children and Valiant Comics, and we had one of our soap stars appear in the Second Life of Dr. Mirage. So I always found ways to work out comics and get involved in it. And one of the things I learned working in the soap opera side was, you know, the continuous storytelling. And I saw a lot of similarities between soaps and comic books in the sense that we're telling continuous fiction with the same characters. You know, the one thing daytime has to deal with is the fact that they never go into reruns. So you're constantly having to come up with new stories, constantly having to come up with new ways, new attitudes, new directions for your characters, new mixes, new problems, new dangers, new romances, new everything, because that's the way the shows work. And you have an extremely loyal fan base in soaps as you do in comics. So I saw how the fiction was being told in the soap operas, and I've always stored it away because I always found it to be extremely fascinating how they used to plan out stories 8 months in advance, a year in advance, but also were able to make changes based upon what characters were breaking out and what actors were really the ones garnering the most attention. Then I moved into daytime. Then I moved into Saturday morning, and by working in the cartoons, got a real chance of being able to craft episodic stories, which is where I was working with a number of series. I'd worked on things like a show called Reboot, Tales from the Crypt Keeper, animated Free Willy, Dumb and Dumber. So I got a chance to really get more of a structured form of storytelling. And I would look at it, a half-hour show similar to working, a 22-page comic book in some ways.
Sure. Was your work in animation, was that tied to your work at Mainframe as well?
Well, it's the way it worked out is that I was executive director of ABC Saturday Morning, and then Disney bought ABC, and they were basically closing down our department.
Right.
I had the job of canceling Reboot at the time, and they got revenge, and then they hired me to be the story editor of the next season when they received financing to just actually produce the show in Canada to start with, and that started my relationship with Mainframe. So I wound up a story editor for Mainframe, and then actually I wound up opening their LA offices, handling the development, and then the marketing of product, and then some of the sales of the product as well.
I wonder before we leave television, isn't it crazy? I mean, because I imagine you're only a few years older than me, that Saturday mornings used to be the destination for all kids and really comic book tie-ins and stuff.
Well, it's amazing for me because I saw the transition.
Okay.
Taking place. I was there when Nickelodeon exploded.
Right.
And, Saturday morning, which was the only stop for kids, for kids cartoons. It really was the place to be. All of a sudden, the three networks, or the fourth network, once you had the Fox in the mix.
Sure.
Were all of a sudden being overshadowed by a cable channel that didn't have the same amount of, basically exposure as it. You got to realize the cable only was seen in 2/3 of the country, and yet they were garnishing almost double the rating of what ABC was getting at the time.
Let's move on to DC then.
Sure.
I know you started writing Superboy with Jimmy Palmiotti. Was that? I know you had a Guardian pitch, which eventually became the Superboy title instead.
That's my cautionary tale in comics.
Was that Jim Harper, the Guardian?
Actually, no. We came up with a new Guardian character.
Okay.
What happened was that Jimmy was just breaking into writing. And Jimmy and I had known each other for a long time. We actually lived in the same building back in Brooklyn, where he still lives now, actually.
Okay.
And what happened was that we had, Jimmy was trying to push a lot of things, and we were pitching things like 2099 stories over at Marvel. And he came over to DC, and we pitched the Guardian idea, and it actually went through quite a long process. And then ultimately the project was rejected because, ironically, a similar theme story was going to be taking place in Superboy at the time.
Okay.
So they basically pushed our idea aside, and that was that. Then you flash forward about 3 years later. Jimmy's breaking out now as a writer. He's writing Deadpool, I think, was at the time. And the DC guys approach him, and they said, "Would you be interested in doing something here?" And Jimmy, not wanting to waste any good ideas, said, I had a pitch in with a friend over there for the Guardian. So they said, "Sure, why don't you dust it off and send it back in?" So we sent the Guardian pitch back in. They said, "Great, I love it." The only thing missing is a guest star. You should have a guest star in it. We love everything about it, but let's put a guest star in it. Why don't you put Superboy as a guest star, because there's a relationship between the Guardian and Superboy. And we go, "Great, that sounds great." And I get it. Jimmy calls me up. He tells me to make the change. He goes, he comes back. He says, "Listen, this is really good, but we want to see more of the guest stars, so we have to raise the amount of it. Could you make it more about 50-50, the Guardian and Superboy?" I said, "Sure." We make the change. We go ahead and doing it. So then it comes back. He goes, "This is great, but you know what? We're thinking of actually running this in the Superboy line. So instead of just making it about the 50-50 Guardian and Superboy, can you pull back on the Guardian stuff and just push more Superboy stuff to the forefront?" Okay, sure. So we make the change again and we send it back in. Then the last one comes back. "Listen, we love all your Superboy stuff. Can you just take the Guardian stuff out because it's not working for us?" So Jimmy tells me that story, and I'm on the phone with him, and there's a pause. And I'm like, "Jimmy, are we writing Superboy?" And he goes to me, "Yeah, shh, quiet, don't say a word, just write." So we wound up starting it. Then ultimately we were on it for what was going to be, an unlimited run at the time. But what had happened was, there was this. Ironically, as the first issue of Superboy was coming out, I was interviewing for the job here at DC Comics. and it was just crazy serendipity. And what happened was that even more ironic was the fact that as I'm interviewing with Paul Levitz, he doesn't even know that I'm one of the co-writers on Superboy at the time. I have to tell him in the course of the interview. Which was, you could see that there was a strange look, there was a strange pause and look like, what? And I'm like, I really got to know more about what's going on in my books. So by the time the interview was done, I had come in the doors. It was awkward for me to be writing and then also trying to learn about the area and things like that.
Okay.
Plus I felt that Superboy wasn't working at the time and the direction wasn't working and we didn't have a strong direction to go into. So ultimately we wound up canceling the series. So my first official act at DC Comics was to cancel the book that I was working on.
Well, and I appreciate the changes that you guys ultimately made in Superboy, because I think, maybe the string had run out in terms of the way the character was originally positioned post Reign of the Superman.
Right.
And then you guys found a new purpose for him, or one of the creators did. And I think that's really been a hallmark of your tenure, is finding new purpose in established characters and kind of breathing new life in them.
What we actually did, what I wanted to do was, there's several stories here. The first one is that when I first walked in the door, I would sit there, and this is the one I always get the most complaints about in my story, but I have to tell it anyway, so we can renew all the complaints again. I looked at Supergirl that came out at the time. And we're looking at a comic called Supergirl, and I'm like, so tell me about Supergirl. And the answer comes back. She's a protoplasmic matrix from a pocket dimension that merged with some suicidal teenager that's now infused with the Angel of Vengeance and Fire, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I stopped and I said, what? And I said, yeah, that's Supergirl. And I said, what's that have to do with Superman and Supergirl? And the answer comes back to me and goes, absolutely nothing. Isn't that great? It has nothing to do with Superman and Supergirl at all. And I said, yeah, but everything we do about Supergirl it's that Superman's cousin. And that was one of the first things we started to realize, is that they got to a period of change in comics, primarily from the 90s. There was so much product being put out and so much need for big event and changes and things going on there that so much was changed just for the sake of change.
Sure.
And as the expression goes, they threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Absolutely.
They threw out, you forgot what the core concept was about. You forgot what the strength was about. You go to Green Lantern or Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan's killed and everybody, the Green Lantern core is destroyed because they want to make Green Lantern unique. Green Lantern was never about being unique. Green Lantern was always about being a member of a force, a member of a police force. That's like saying any police drama can never work because there's too many cops, So you have to make the characters good. So what it was about, everything we did was, let's scrape down every character to its core concept. Let's scrape down, and we sat in rooms, literally, and sat down and said, what do we like about these guys? Why do people care? Why do people care about Green Lantern? Why do people care about Superman? Why do people care about Supergirl? Why do people care about all these different characters? And what we came back with is that if there was enough strength at the core concept or the initial idea, then we would build around that a new sense of contemporary stories and a new contemporary idealism. If it didn't, then what we did is says, you know what, let's roll the dice. Let's try a new direction for this. Let's try something new. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about Firestorm all the time, about why we came up with Jason Rush. Because what happened was, and what people forget, is the fact that Firestorm was about Ronnie Raymond and Martin Stein. And then It became about somebody else, and they kept on evolving that character to the point that they got so far away from the core concept. And then when you started to look at the story, we looked at Martin Stein and started to realize, well, the old guy is the more interesting guy. He's the one whose life is constantly in flux. He's the one who comes up with all the fixes. He's the one whose life is in turmoil because he's being sucked into a matrix and has no control over it. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, he's the one with all the problems that has to overcome. And Martin Stein was more interesting than Ronnie Raymond at how it was being developed. And we said, you know what? If we wanted to approach and have a younger take on this character, then we needed to go back to a new set. And since Ronnie was so tied to Martin, we wanted to go with a brand new direction, and that's how we came up with Jason.
That's fair. How would you compare that, though, to what you guys tried to do with Aquaman? And I'll say right off the bat, I've enjoyed what Kurt and Butch guys have done on the book, and I thought it was an interesting turn. And I also think, and I'd like this as a follow-up, I think there are certain Justice League members, despite their being so well known, that I think it's tough to maintain a monthly book with a lot of these guys.
That's a huge question. The question is whether or not some characters are just meant to be supporting cast members.
Yeah.
And some people might say Aquaman, and you can go to Marvel with Namor,
Absolutely.
Submariner. these are two characters that have very similar themes to it naturally, and neither one of them has able to continuously support product for an extended period of time.
Yeah, great runs through the decades for both characters.
Great bits and pieces, great interesting things. I think, when Peter David jumped on Aquaman when he first came on, the whole sensibility, great stuff there. A lot of fun, a lot of excitement. But it sort of wandered away. And even with us, when we came and we wanted to do the Sub Diego story, a lot of fun and excitement when we first started, but it sort of meandered a little bit. And again, once we decided to change direction with Kurt, we really wanted to throw it out and get a fresh set of eyes. It was all about getting a fresh look, a fresh idealism, and so that you would be able to follow that story and go ahead. I mean, what happened was that with all the multiple incarnations of Aquaman through the years, we actually got away from the whole Arthur Curry concept, so we wanted to get back to it again.
Okay, but and I don't know what's coming out. And by the way, Dan, I'm one of those guys that actually likes reading the books and not finding out until the book is actually read.
Yeah, you might. My problem is that I actually find out. Unfortunately, I do find out when I actually read it what happens too. By the way.
Well, it seems like maybe things are shifting back to the Orin Aquaman, and I don't know. We'll see, I guess, where the book lands with the new writer. But I'm also curious because it seems now, and I think to a degree of success, that a lot of concepts might start with your core go-to writers like Grant Morrison, Greg Rucka, Jeff Johns, and then sometimes are passed on to another writer. The Atom is a good example of that. Or not. You
know what? I'm always too honest sometimes. Here's my problem. What happens is that we say, you know what, we want to do something with Aquaman, right? We know it.
Right.
So what happens is that you get a half dozen pitches.
Right.
That come in from different writers. And you look at them, and you know what? They're all various shades of gray. One's a little bit better here, one's a little bit better there, one's a little bit better here, one's a little bit better there. So the problem is that, you don't get exactly what you want, which you think it might be the strongest product. I have a lot of faith. I mean, Grant Morrison in particular is just an idea machine. He's just brilliant.
Sure.
There's no way to describe it. He comes up with more ideas and more concepts than most people do, in a career, and he can come up with it over lunch. And honestly, he throws things out there and with such direction, clarity, and attitude that you believe it. The hard part sometimes is the execution.
Certainly.
Take those ideas and be able to execute them properly because it's so unique in the way he presents it. But what we're trying to do right now is go to the people who we think understands the direction of the universe the best so that we can hopefully launch out. And that's not to malign anyone else. It's just to say these are the guys who we're comfortable with in working with because we've have a long relationship and they know the direction, they know the focus, they know the attitude. And that way we get a more, I don't want to say unified vision, but more consistency in what the vision of the world is.
Is there enough room, though, for creative freedom for a team to come in?
Absolutely.
And still also, I can appreciate both ends of that as well. Tell your own story, but by the same token, big events are coming. Certain beats do have to be hit to figure into the bigger story as well.
Absolutely. Again, why didn't Marvel work so well? In the early days, the stuff that was the reason why it was established with such a tight continuity. That's because Stan Lee ran gunshot on it.
Okay.
For the first years, he wrote it all. For the next bunch of years, he edited it all. And the next bunch of years, a bunch of people were just responding to the way Stan had done it.
Mm-hmm.
You get other editor-in-chiefs and other people coming in. How would Stan write this book? What would Stan do? And it's not until later on, until Jim Shooter comes along, that it starts to branch out a little bit, but it's still very clearly tied to those early origins. What's happened with DC Comics is that every time somebody new comes in, they look to put their stamp on it. They look to switch it. They look to flip it. And what we're trying to do is make sure that there's a uniformity, a direction, and a basis from which all the concepts have come from, so therefore we don't have that wildly divergent styles every time a new team comes on board. You don't want to have a new exciting direction every 6 issues.
No, I agree with that, but I also think that you, in a good way, exploit the idea of events and just making specific arcs where, take for example, even right now what you're doing in Batman. Grant Morrison maybe falls behind. That's great. You guys plug in a big team like Ostrander and Mandrake to come in.
That's the goal. The goal is never to make it feel like consistency in product is very tough to maintain right now. And
Sure.
I'm a very strong believer in the monthly book. That's what comics are. That's what unique is about it. We are periodical storytellers. And granted, we're having so much problems, or we're having difficulties maintaining level of schedules with our best-selling books and some of the other books as well, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't shoot to be monthly storytellers. And in order to do that, we just have to be smarter and plan ahead. And to make sure that, we know the days of dropping in a reprint book as a fill-in to fill in for a month are over.
Sure.
Nothing quite like picking up that issue of Iron Man where he's fighting Hulk and find out that it's a reprint from Iron Man number 10.
I remember.
Okay, I figured you would. I love throwing out references and see who gets them. Anyway, but that worked then. What we need to do right now is be able to work out, and if we have a greater fiction going, and we know our expectations on delivery from talent and the current teams, then what we can do is be able to build where we think we can drop in stories that matter at times when they matter most. And that's the goal of the line.
It seems like you do a mix, too, of having faith in a specific creative team and letting them go for years on a given book. Or it's interesting that in the case of, I think once you established or reestablished with the Jim Lee runs on things like Batman and Superman, that you are able to kind of, with those characters, bring in creative teams for a 6-month arc and then move on and give it to somebody else.
You know what that depends on? It depends on how iconic a character is.
Okay.
Because a Batman or a Superman is so iconic, and everybody's so clear about who they are and what their character motivations are and behaviors are, that you can move teams in and out much more frequently without upsetting the apple cart, so to speak.
Sure.
When you have a book like Birds of Prey, though, which has a very distinct voice and a distinct vision, and Gail Simone has really made that her own, it's very hard to extract her from the book without losing some of the personality from the book. And I think in some cases you can change teams without the character suffering. In some cases you might have to hold back a little bit to make sure that whatever balance you've achieved is maintained for the success of the series.
That's cool. I like the way that you guys have used 52, and really even before it, in some ways, Infinite Crisis, to reintroduce a bunch of characters that had been sitting unused for so many years. And I wonder...
That's the fun part. I mean, there's two jobs here. There's two jobs. There's maintenance. Make sure that Superman, Batman, Justice League, and Teen Titans are the best they can be. That's maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
The other job is finding a way to make the other characters that sit on the skirt and the edge that are somebody's favorites but have never hit the radar in a big way, find a way to make them exciting and make them bigger than they are. That's the one that gets you juiced a lot more, because when you press that button and you find a way to make something that hasn't worked in the past worked, there's nothing more exciting than that. You see people reacting and getting excited about things they're not supposed to be.
Okay. In terms of 52, I just talked about this with Mark Waid. I know there are characters in 52 that will spin off into either new miniseries or new ongoings, and I don't know which ones and don't really want to know specifically. But
you got any ideas? Because we're running out of time.
Well, are you able to measure fan reaction in a good way? Because there's sales, and obviously 52 is doing great. It's consistently selling well. But can you really get into the minutiae and say, wow, that little interlude with Super Chief really worked, but, reintroducing the Atomic Knights in the Battle for Bloodhaven didn't? There's two that I could pull out of my ass for you.
Yeah, that was a fun one. Everybody thought I lost my mind, including myself.
Which one, Super Chief or the Atomic Knights?
There's nothing quite like pitching Paul Levitt's The Atomic Knights, let me tell you. He looked at me like, you're kidding, right?
I thought that was great, man.
I said, trust me. And they become even bigger going ahead. That's even more fun about it. What's the best way to put that?
I've stumped you.
Yeah, you did. No, it's not. I'm just trying to phrase it properly.
No, that's cool, man.
Ask the question one more time.
Well, is there a way of looking at 52 and finding these specific characters and saying, this one works, this one doesn't?
Because my answer's a non-answer. I've already done that. One of the spin-off books that was going to come out of 52 is no longer there. It's now something else because something broke bigger in the course of the run of the series.
Okay.
How about that?
All right. No, that's interesting.
Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. That's actually happened twice.
Oh, okay. That's cool. And that's one of the things I love about when you do your panels of the DC Nation, because you're hilarious that way, and I like the way that you've just kind of cryptically answered things like that in the large group, and I give you credit for running what could be sometimes a pretty unruly crowd because of. It's so funny. I don't think people realize. I said this to Joe Quesada a few weeks ago, and I don't mean to keep name dropping, but I always want to get your opinion and let people know what other creators have said about this subject as well. I don't think some people who are so passionate about their characters realize how indestructible they are in terms of the ways you can mess with them. And if something doesn't work, you can always, either go back and go with what's always worked or try something different.
Since 1938. I've only been around since 1959. And guess what? When I'm gone, he's going to still be around.
You bet.
That's reality. You know what? And as soon as you understand that reality, you're going to realize whatever mark you make on him will make effect to someone and something, hopefully, that you've done something. But at the end of the day, the character will prevail.
Sure.
You know what I mean? When
Absolutely.
I sit here and I get into arguments with people, I can identify when they started buying comics based upon what they're most passionate about. Because you could say, if somebody comes to me and goes, "Oh, I can't believe Wally West," and I go, "Ha, post-crisis," you know? you know what I mean?
Yes, they do.
And they go like this, and it's like, you know, so you're able to build that relationship with everybody based upon what they love. You know, you could figure it out.
Well, and conversely, now I'm not going to hammer you about Nightwing because I think you've explained yourself. What I want to know though is, and that's fair because I think you were very fair in saying it's a redundant character if there already is somebody else's Robin.
Absolutely.
What was there one specific argument, or was it the chorus of everyone explaining to you why Dick Grayson was important? What was it that made you say, okay?
It's a chorus.
Okay.
Jeff Johns leading the chorus. Paul Levitz, of course, naturally part of the chorus.
Sure.
Which is the biggest voice of them all.
You bet.
And I didn't push it because we had a better solution.
Okay.
Okay? I think we had and I shouldn't say better solution, but a solution of equal value that I thought brought the same impact. I think that, and the most interesting thing that came out of it all is the concept of discussion about Nightwing. DC Comics, took Nightwing for granted. We take Nightwing for granted. That's what happens. So if anything, it creates that discussion that allows you to examine whether or not the character has more potential or not. Okay, so the question is, okay, so everybody's yelling at me. Why are you yelling? What are you upset about? Why do you love Nightwing so much? You know? And if it's because I read one issue of him 20 years ago, that's not an answer. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But if it's because this is the strength of the character, this is who he represents, this is why he's different from Batman, this is the reason why he's different from Tim Drake, this is why he's going to be playing against Jason Todd, and this is his role, and you remove him from that role, everything comes apart. Then you got something interesting. So you say, okay, now if I pull Nightwing out, well, everything comes apart. What happens if I leave him in? With the knowledge that everything would have came apart if he came out.
Sure. No, and I think that's
and that's the story.
Yeah, and that's what I look forward to, and obviously you've teased that, I think, in the books, that, let's see what does happen now that there is this kind of paradox of, no, he was supposed to die. Yeah. And that's way to go to turn a negative into a positive. I think that's great.
And that's what it was. And then what happened is that we examined other characters of similar veins, and then something started to come alive, which will be playing out through all of 2007.
Very cool. Are there other generational characters that that you guys have identified, that, older members of the audience, can say, hey, that's my character? Like, I always thought, especially during Crisis, that two guys that I was worried about dying were Alan Scott and Jay Garrick, because I just figured, well, they're the golden age, they've had their day in the sun. I can appreciate their standing as a mentor character, but I can also see it being, hey, these are old men. I don't know how many useful stories we have.
That's one of the reasons why we found new ways to play them. Alan Scott moved into a mentor role in the Checkmate book.
You bet.
And from there, Jay Garrick moved into a role of mentor to Bart Allen and a character for Bart to play again.
Sure.
So in both cases, see, it's weird because I don't see the redundancies. This is where you get tattooed. I don't see the redundancies in Jay Garrick and Alan Scott. Because, again, they serve a purpose. They're a benchmark to what has come before. They're a voice from a past. They're their grandparents sitting in the room. And the fact that they have generational ties throughout the DC universe is important.
Sure.
That's what's exciting to me. What the difference between Alan Scott and Dick Grayson is Alan Scott's got two children. He's got a history with the team. He's got a long past, and people turn to him for advice. People do that with Dick, but reality is that a lot of questions being asked Dick could go to somebody else, or maybe not, and that's the reason why he survives.
I got you. Is when you first started as executive editor, you threw a lot of things against the wall that were non-superhero, and I liked a lot of them. Yeah. And Judd Winnick's mob story, and right now, thank you very much. It was great. Is there room for those kind of books still in the DCU?
I would hope so, but. I tried. You're right. As I always like to say, Hush covered up so many mistakes I can't tell you, and Hush covered up so many other attempts at product. Remember the Focus books?
Yes, and I wanted to ask about that because, I hope you don't consider those mistakes.
Far from it.
Good.
But the way we presented them, and my problem is the expectation level when you put the DC logo on the book. There's an expectation of product.
Sure.
And the bottom line is that for me, And the hardest thing for me to let go was the fact that I liked doing those things, but I also understood that that's what Vertigo's role is, and that's what Wildstorm's role is. There's a lot more experimentation going on there in great ways. And one of my roles is to push the superhero line. And one of the things that I'm going to try to do is find ways to show variations of superhero themes. That's what Focus was about. It was trying to take the core conceit of what a superhero comic is and turn it around so that you could see the dotted line between Focus and the DC universe. You couldn't see a line between Caper and the DCU. So it's harder for me to do a Caper-style book because a Caper could easily land on a Vertigo's desk or it's on a Wildstorm desk. But from my standpoint, I have to look at, say, what makes sense from extending out from the DC universe. Jonah Hex made sense.
Sure.
Even though he's not in costume, he is in costume. Even though he's not a superhero, he is a superhero. That's why Jonah makes sense. And we're going to continue to push that. That's one of the reasons why we kept a big push on trying to go with science fiction and a big push trying to go with horror and mystery. Big push trying to even expand on the Western line. We're going to bring back Batlash because the reason why is that you don't want to be just doing one flavor, but what I've got to do is be able to give variations of flavor that our core audience accepts.
Is there a team set for Batlash?
I think, yeah. Actually, we're all set now. We've got, you got to forgive me, but Sergio's back involved in the book. We got John Severin on the art.
Oh, that's great.
And I'm sorry, the writer's name escapes me, but we've actually brought in a very accomplished Western writer, novelist, to come on board and work with John to pull the book together.
Wow, and what will is Sergio Aragonis' role in the book?
Sergio created the characters. We wanted him back involved, so he's actually giving a lot of insight on how the character works, and I think he's co-writing the book as I'm speaking, if I'm understanding you correctly.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And God, John, every time someone brings up John Severin, I always have to point out he's like one of the best guys from the Golden Age that I think falls under the radar when you talk about some of the great guys from the 40s, 50s, and on.
Right.
So that's great. He's a brilliant Western artist. So that's
it's just wonderful. You'd be surprised how many people can't draw horses anymore.
Tell me about are we cool for a couple more minutes?
Yeah, we've got 5 more minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Tell me about the Year One books that you've got coming up. Green Arrow, Metamorpho, Teen Titans, Year One.
The whole purpose of Year Ones is that we have a couple of characters that have been spun on their ears a little bit. It was funny. Metamorpho is a perfect example. When I first started here, there was a month, ironically, where Metamorpho appeared in 3 or 4 books the same exact month, which is wonderful for Metamorpho, but what was disappointing for me is that there was a lack of consistency in the representation of the character. He acted one way in one book. He acted like the remote in Frayden Metamorpho in one book. He looked like the Outsiders Metamorpho here. He acted like the Justice League Metamorpho there. And everybody took their interpretation or their favorite interpretation and inserted that into the character. And we sit in a room and go, what's the right direction? Because ultimately it's hard to pinpoint the clear line for certain characters who are popular but have been just used randomly throughout the line over years. So what I'm trying to do is find a way to unify the themes, unify the thoughts behind the character, give them a better base to work from. So therefore, when we say, here, you want to use Metamorpho, this is what he's about. And more importantly, when people read the miniseries, they go, okay, that's the Metamorpho I like, and that's the one I'm going to go looking for.
Okay.
And, and that happened to me with Metamorpho, and that actually happened, we actually had a month where Black Lightning appeared in 4 books, and he wore 3 different costumes in the same month.
Well, that's cosmetic, but it's funny now. I think in terms of Black Lightning, there was Tony Isabella had a very strong, very very straight line in terms of what his character was. Wouldn't that be solved as well? And taking nothing away from Jen Van Meter, who I'm a huge fan of, but wouldn't it be served as well by just coming out with a showcase featuring all those stories from the 70s?
We won't.
Okay.
But I mean, what's happened on this is that you got to remember what we've also done since Tony's run on the book. And believe me, I have every single issue of that as well.
Attaboy. That's cool.
From Tobias Whale on out.
You bet. No, that's a great character. Absolutely.
And one of the things that it's deadly cyanide. Is there cyanide in that stuff? I don't know. Anyway, this is when the brain starts working in bad ways.
Where's there cyanide?
What?
What, in something you're eating there's cyanide?
No, it wasn't cyanide. Wasn't the villains in Black Lightning?
Oh, something, I just remember Tobias Whale and really I really remember those first 10 or 20 issues mostly.
Yeah, and then they had that second run of the book too, which was real solid.
Okay.
They had some backup work that was done. If I'm not mistaken, Denny O'Neil did backups in Detective and a couple other places with Black Lightning. And then we had Black Lightning as the Secretary of
yes, under Luthor,
under Luthor over there, and we've got a new daughter retconned into his history.
Yes.
And to be perfectly honest, I think he's a hugely viable character. That's one of the reasons why, and we've had some success. We've had actually some success. We've had a lot of success with Outsiders, and we're trying to rebuild that team. Black Lightning is now coming to the forefront in Justice League of America. It seemed like the right time just to place him out there again with a first-year origin, just to set the rules, especially with the success we're seeing with the character in Justice League.
Very cool. Last question.
Sure.
War Books. I thought Garth Ennis's series was just exceptional. And was that a Vertigo series? I think it was a Vertigo series.
Actually, no. It was over at Wildstorm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The War Stories. Well, I really loved the showcases lately, showing how great those books were, and especially during the Silver Age. I think there was really good writing going on.
Yep.
I think that people don't look back and realize, because it's so easy to dismiss those books as being written for kids. And there's great art and great writing, and it was so great to see the Unknown Soldier collection.
I'll tell you right now, if you're enjoying things, look at what people have forgotten and lost art is what you're reading in the showcases, things like that, which is the ability to tell a story in 8 to 11 pages.
Exactly.
Take a look at that. It's very hard to get people to write like that these days, and it's an amazing craft. And it's unfortunate that we don't have outlets for talent to be able to tell stories in that format, because I think it's an incredible tool, because if you have strength in being able to tell a story that gets people involved in 11 pages, imagine how well you can tell a story when you open up the story some more. So,
Jimmy and Justin are doing a good job telling done-in-one stories in Jonah Hex.
Exactly.
Are you trying to find more teams that can do that?
Yeah, we are. I think that's some of the things we're going to look for. Granted, because like I said, a lot of things that we're building towards are going to have the ability that we're going to need certain things to be told or stated in a single story, but add to the overall theme. I mean, that's what a lot of people say is like, oh, you never ended Infinite Crisis, it keeps on going. I said, well, you know what? After Infinite Crisis ends, we still got to put another 55 books out next month. I'd love to tell you something otherwise, but it's not true. I got to put out these books every month. So I'm going to need story, and I'm going to build on what works and what's successful and what people are reacting to. What's interested me is that the fact that I still have people upset about Identity Crisis and the scene with Sue Dibney.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting to me about that's 4 years ago, and they're still angry. So that means it's a really good story.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing that up and saying that, because I agree with you, and I think plot devices are nothing new, and they've been going on for decades. And I think people read into them a lot more than they should, and should step back every now and then and remember that this is fiction.
Yep.
And I would say entertaining fiction as well, and I congratulate you on some very interesting, strong stories that at least evoke a strong reaction, and I guess at the end of the day, that means they're reading the books, and that's good news.
I feel the two things I'm most proud of are the fact that it elicits such a strong reaction, and I think we told the story as best it can be told. And I think that's the thing that we're most proud of, is the fact that we told a story that was so strong, that it got such a strong response, and I think we told it in a responsible and intelligent manner, and that's what we're proud of. I can't tell you how much I hold Identity Crisis as something that I feel is such an important moment for DC Comics.
And ramifications are still being played out.
Absolutely. I always joke about Spider-Man. Spider-Man is my favorite character. Surprise, surprise. But Spider-Man, my favorite. You know what I loved about Spider-Man?
No.
Which if we did today, everybody would go crazy about. The whole bit of Norman Osborn. That after Spider-Man beats Norman Osborn, first we go through Green Goblin, where we don't know who he is.
Right.
Then it's revealed to be his roommate's father. Ta-da! And then the roommate's father loses his memory. Convenient, after revealing his secret identity. And then every time we see the father, there's that glimmer, like, I'm gonna remember. There's that thing like, something about Peter Parker doesn't sit right. And there's something so great about how that played out. And you've got to realize that story played out for 110 issues.
Wow, yeah.
And if you look at the Green Goblin story, it's one continuous story over 110 issues, from the moment that we first meet Green Goblin to the moment he gets killed.
No, that's a good point. That's a very good point. No,
and then the story continues then to the sun. So if people are looking for neat endings, that's not what we do. We do periodicals.
Sure. And really, I think Elongated Man has become a very tragic character, which is, someplace where he needed to go, because he's always been such a light character, and Sue was the center of his universe. So I think if you are going to upset an apple cart, that's where you go.
I mean, we also get into a very interesting discussion on Shazam. Last topic.
Okay.
We have Trials of Shazam going, which I feel is continuing the story of Shazam. We're using Freddie Freeman, which I think is truthful. We're using Freddie Freeman as tied into the storyline.
Yes.
We're building upon everything that existed before, all the lore. We're building out of continuity that came out from the miniseries into Infinite Crisis. So I feel that it's very beholden to the direction of what we want with the characters today. A lot of people are looking for that light CC Beck look, but unfortunately, it didn't sell in the 70s, it didn't sell in the 80s, it didn't sell in the 90s, and we have no reason to believe it'll sell today, although we are trying something as close to that as possible with the Jeff Smith. So fingers crossed, Jeff Smith stuff can really break big, but that's on the strength of that creator as well. Jeff Smith is an incredibly powerful and talented person, and I think that he will drive attention to that product just as much as Shazam will.
Last quick question, is there another humor creator that might be able to bring that lightness? I mean, depending on how well...
I don't know if that lightness ever worked.
Okay.
But it works for a moment. It works for a snapshot. It doesn't work on a continuous basis.
I hear you.
Yeah, I mean, even when we go back to the Justice League stuff for the, I figure I might as well bring up everything that, people can rant about. But we go back to the Giffen stuff. My problem was never with what Giffen and DeMatteis and Maguire did when the series first launched. That stuff is incredibly strong. It has humor, but it's all character humor. The people that followed and the way it was built on, and not only that, but how it expanded out through the line, turned it into comedic characters. Dr. Fate turns comedic.
Sure.
Mr. Miracle turned comedic, and these are not comedic characters. They were starting to look like buffoons.
Okay. Well, no, that's fair. I just think it just outlived its usefulness when it became 3 books, the quarterly and the 2 monthlies as well. And it's any joke when it's told 10,000 times gets a little old after a while.
Exactly. And so what happens is, unfortunately, you have to scrub it all clean and then start fresh again. And that's ultimately what Morrison's books did. And the biggest knock on the biggest change from the Giffen DeMatteis stuff is not when we kill the characters, but actually when the Justice League was launched with the Big Seven, the idea of the Big Seven, that everybody else in there wasn't worthy to be in the team. We only want the Big Seven.
I appreciate your time. I thought this was a great conversation. I hope we could do it again in the future.
That sounds great. I appreciate it as well.
Next up, a real brief little floor hit at a convention. As the years have gone on, I do less and less convention floor interviews. I don't mind recording panels. I'll be doing that for C2E2, obviously, this weekend for my 2 panels, Sven Gulli and also Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda Connor. And I'll certainly, be asking them about their thoughts on Dan. And I know Jimmy's a good friend of Dan's, and I know that Jimmy will remind us all of some of the great accomplishments that Dan has done over the years. But this was a really brief floor hit in 2007, and the greatest compliment I had, because, really, I'm a foot soldier, as I always like to say. You don't need to know who I am necessarily. But I knew I was obviously, clicking with everybody because I showed up. I did Wizard Chicago in 2005. Word Balloon was about 3 months old then. And then in 2006, I did it again. And all of a sudden, DC executives were going, "Oh, you're the guy that imitates Dan DiDio. We love you." And I'm like, really? That's really nice. So I'm like, does Dan like it? Oh, yeah, no, he's a good sport about it. And I'm like, okay, great. So here's a little brief interlude with Dan from 2007 on Word Balloon.
I just wanted to say right now I'm talking to myself because I find myself in a situation where words are not going to escape me. So here he is, Dan DiDio. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
I wind up talking to myself all the time, and nobody ever listens to me. So this works out really well.
Not true. I look in the mirror every day, and I say, brilliant. We got to keep it going. I don't know how the hell we're going to do it, but every idea is gold, and they all listen to me, but I hope they will eventually.
You should do this.
Dude, I'm so glad that you like it, because seriously, you're doing a great job.
This is a big year for us. A lot of things are happening with Countdown. We announced Final Crisis. I feel that a lot of things that we've been putting in motion for the last 2 or 3 years are finally starting to gel. And just from these panels, from these conventions, we went to San Diego. Everything's been going on. It's just been a great response, and I feel that everybody's getting on board and picking up the sense of excitement that we know that we have coming.
Well, and it's nice to see the outside world's going to be able to get a taste of it, too, with the DVDs and everything that's going on as far as the animation and stuff like that.
The DVD for us is a way to expose the stories. I mean, it's not just about people adapting what are the characters, but actually adapting the stories themselves, and that's what's special to us, because these things, their origins come from the comics. They started with the comics, so we feel much more beholden to the material and more excited about it when we see them on air.
All right, excellent. There's a countdown on my pants, and I want you to know that eventually we are going to sit down and we'll do another long talk if we can.
I'll tell you right now, by the end of this year, we can have a real talk about what's going on. You'll have
All right, good.
By that time, you'll see where Salvation Run is going, where Jackson News Guard is going, where Countdown is going, and more importantly, what Final Crisis might be.
All right, so we'll talk in December, man.
That sounds perfect.
That'd be awesome, Dan.
Great.
Thanks again, man.
Thank you, now.
Unfortunately, there was a running theme of, hey, let's pick up this conversation on the phone in a couple months. Yeah, all right, sounds like a good idea. And then, of course, it didn't happen. It's not Dan's fault. It's sometimes it's hard to arrange these things, whether it's scheduling or whatever. But I am disappointed that I don't get to talk to the DC brass as much as, say, the Marvel brass or some of the others of heads of other comic book publishers and other bigwigs at television shows or film things. What can you do? So you do the best you can, and you catch people like Dan at the best chances you can. Here's another conversation, a little bit longer, another con floor talk from 2008 on Word Balloon.
Speaking with Dan DiDio here at the DC booth, and he was just accosted by Mario and Luigi.
Was that Mario and Luigi, really? they both had L's on their head. That's the reason why.
Well,
So I think it was Luigi and Luigi, actually. Luigi. That's right. Yeah, gift to Luigi.
I talked to you yesterday and everything, and I know you're getting kind of beat up online, but as always, you have a great demeanor about it, and it's just made
Online, I have no idea what you're talking about.
There you go, man. That's good.
Okay. What else?
Well,
Is that what we have to talk about?
Not at all. Final
I
Crisis.
don't respond to rumors, you know that.
No, Final Crisis too, man. I mean, it's fun to see Barry back, obviously, and as an old-time fan, I'm always happy to see Barry Allen back.
Yeah, I think this is we keep on saying this is the end of the Final Crisis, the third part of the Final Crisis trilogy. So we want to bring a sense of closure to everything that happened there. We've seen the multiverse return. We've seen Civil War return. So the one last big piece of the puzzle from Crisis on Infinite Earths was the return of Barry Allen, and we're happy to have him back in the DCU. We just hope he sticks around for a little while. That's all.
Well, I think fans like me will say the same thing. We hope so too. I mean, obviously, I'm assuming there's more announcements to come, or depending on how the story develops. I'm not really sure. I mean,
well, it's again, when we did DC Universe Zero, we could finally admit to the fact that the narrator of DC Universe Zero was Barry Allen. It's about his return, about his need to basically step down from heaven and to return back to Earth in order to fight the great evil that's just hit the DC Universe. And he has one of the keys to help solving it, but unfortunately, it's the one thing that he has isn't enough for everyone.
Okay, so he is not the counterbalance to Libra.
No, not at all. Not at all. He is the one. He's basically leading the charge of the heroes against Darkseid and all of everybody's follows on Darkseid's rule.
Hearing you yesterday at the DC Nation, I know some of the random questions came up, like who might be the next Batman, hypothetically, if Batman were to go.
Everything's hypothetical when it comes to Batman.
Well, and I was wondering, going back to some of the reboots and some of the changes in characters like Aquaman, like the Atom and stuff, you've had successes and failures in terms of,
success and failure is only measured, by sales at some points. For me, I always look at every one of the storylines and every one of the characters as an opportunity to try something new, something different, either get back to basics or reinvent the wheel, and we always got to keep on trying. When you talk about characters like the Atom or Captain Atom, these were never long perennial sellers, so it made sense for us to try something different, try something new with them. But when you have characters like the Flash and Green Lantern, it's important to get back to basics because they have such a strong fan base. You want to play to what people remember and what people react to, and hopefully people will respond to. And that's one of the reasons why we keep on pushing as much as we can to mix it up as much as possible. Some of the classic sense, something brand new, and a lot in between.
Well, I was wondering, with characters like those second-tier heroes, like the Atom and Aquaman and stuff, is it possible that they're better served in standalone quality miniseries versus, attempting an ongoing?
You can talk, they've never had long-term success on an ongoing basis. They've had some success on miniseries basis, but probably where they're the best served sometimes is supporting characters in some of the other series they have taking place. We have a lot of great team books, and these are great characters that really enhance the overall dimension and sensibilities of these team books. So, you want to see the different atoms in there. You want to see Aquaman as part of a team, and that's what you're going to be seeing coming up in the next couple of years.
That's cool. I'm glad to see that you did, keep your support behind Manhunter. It's great that it's back, and it was nice to see the occasional appearances in Birds of Prey. And maybe that's the way to introduce some of these new characters, is to get them on their feet in a book that's already established, and then maybe try them in a solo book.
Well, we've had for 2 years now everybody's saying everybody's saying to me, where's your Batwoman series? Well, we never really planned to roll a Batwoman series right away. We always wanted to introduce characters as a slow burn. There's a lot of controversy of how we introduced her, but the reality is we want to put her out there first as a hero first, and she's been very heroic roles in a number of series leading up to now, and hopefully it's built enough support and enough acceptance that when we do want to do a series with her, people will respond in a very big way.
How is you've had some times where creators have had to pull out or have gotten behind on delays, and you've had to have people come and fill in both as writers and artists. It seems like the Willingham-Sturgis relationship is a good one because they really were co-writers, and it's nice that Matt is able to lean in. And I've noticed on the other side of the street, the other company is kind of having kind of a mentor writer and a new writer. What do you think of that kind of dynamic for potential DC books?
Well, you know what, I love that because we're always looking for where the new talent comes from, where the next wave is going to come from. And, you know, if you have somebody who's a proven success working that, so much the better for us. You know, Bill with Matt, you know, Matt really saved our bacon on Salvation Run. Bill got sick, and, you know, he couldn't pick up a pen, and or work at a typewriter, I should say, or a computer screen, whatever it's called these days. But Matt really stepped up, helped out, and I really think he really took it and made it his own in a very short period of time. He ran up to speed real fast. And guys like Sterling Gates, who's stepping on board for Supergirl. Well, Sterling's actually a protege of one of Jeff Johns.
Right.
And for me, that's great because not only does it give me a new writer, but also gives me somebody who can work closely with what Jeff's going on and help build a lot of things that what Jeff's doing. So it's a win-win for us.
That's very cool. You know, I don't want to bring up a downer, but unfortunately we lost Michael Turner this week, and I know you made a comment at the panel. I wasn't there. Do you have a moment to tell my listeners just, you know, a few thoughts on a guy that I know has contributed a lot to the DCU in the last few years?
Yeah. It's for me, it's a real personal thing because Michael's one of those guys I consider a true friend in the business. He's somebody I met when I first started here, when I didn't know many others, and he embraced me as like a long-time friend. And together we worked a lot of things out. We had a lot of success together, and we stayed friends even while we were doing work at Marvel. None of that stuff mattered. Michael's was one of the great spirits in comics. Just one of the all-around good guys, and it's, you know, he always had good spirits. And one of the things I was saying is that the last time I saw him was in Wizard World LA, and he came in a wheelchair, and he looked worn, and so he had the weight of the world on him. And for me, you know, I'm like, I literally said to him, "What the hell are you doing here?" And he says, "I'm here for my fans, you know, and I'm here to see them." And it was important for him to be there. People responded well to him, and that's just the guy he is, you know. And people always remember for that.
Well, we're all thinking about him and his family this weekend. Last thing, and very quickly, every time I see Ethan Van Sciver, I know how excited he's always been about Plastic Man. Where are you in that possibility?
You have to talk to Ethan about Plastic Man. A lot of talk during meal conversation. I don't know how much real or not. It's always an open invitation for him on that, open invitation on Wonder Woman and other books as well. So whatever Ethan wants to do, we'll do.
All right. Well, Dan, you've been very patient with me, and I figured I'd save my invitation till the very end.
Thank you very much.
You're always very tolerant of the fact that I mock you, but not in a mean way. I swear it's always done with respect because I enjoy what you do at the DCU.
I know, we do it every time.
See, I'm the Dan DiDio of Earth 53.
I'm actually going to find a way to change how I speak, just so you have to work up to that. Okay?
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, man. I'll talk to you soon.
It's great rifling through and remembering some of these events, man. And even in this conversation from New York Comic Con in 2009, it was great to talk about the Battle for the Cowl. Who could forget that? When Bruce was lost in time and you had Jason, Dick, and Damian Jason, Dick, and Tim fighting for the Batman mantle. Among other things that we talk about. So again, from New York Comic Con in 2009, a little floor talk with Dan DiDio on today's Word Balloon.
All right, welcome back to Newsarama.com. I'm the editor-in-chief of DC Comics, Dan DiDio. I don't know who the hell this guy is, but he's walking around.
Taking up space.
Yeah, and pretending to be me. I don't appreciate it. Oh, it's actually Dan DiDio. How are you today, Dan?
Not bad at all, thanks. It's the third day of the show, and it's been pretty crazy the whole time.
Well, I know we got big stuff coming up. We're very excited about Battle for the for the Crown, but it's the Cowl.
Well, it could have been for the cow, and then it would have been a completely different thing.
Yeah, Farmer Ted is going to go out there with Farmer Jim, and eventually someone's going to be left, and it's going to probably be Farmer Ted.
Exactly.
But who's your money on over here? We got Nightwing. We got, of course, Tim Drake Robin. You got Jason Todd, Hush, and, of course, beautiful Catwoman. I think they'd be fine Batman, all of them. Even Catwoman could get by doing it.
I'd like to see Catwoman in a Batman costume.
Hell yeah. No, honestly, looking forward to Tony's story. I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
Tony's having a lot of fun with the area and the story itself. It's really a kind of exciting thing. We know that Bruce Wayne's missing. You know, the world thinks Bruce Wayne's dead for the most part. And what happens is you get all the heroes of Gotham have rallied around the city in this time of need, because basically without Batman there, all the villains of Gotham City have pretty much taken this moment to step up and take charge of the area. So it's a lot of fun stuff happening.
You know, and also I like that moment in Final Crisis in the final issue. And I'm assuming it ties back to 52, where we had Batman walking into the cave, and you don't know what he sees, but he comes out and he seems to have this sense of serenity. And was that purposely? I mean, you're not Grant. I'm not asking you to climb into Grant's mind, but if you could, is that right? Is that where he was going?
Well, a lot of what was going on is actually bringing the story full circle to the very first cover of Final Crisis. The story opens with the cave symbols up there, and we were actually bringing it full circle. We wondered how those iconic symbols can wind up on the wall, and now we have an idea where Amanda come from.
All right. And Dan, I know this is a PC interview, but I got to ask you, sometimes when you grade Grant stuff, does it help to have like a little mind-altering experience before or after to kind of make sense of everything?
See, I think the interesting thing is that Grant stuff is the mind-altering experience. Everything, you know what? We can have a lot of discussion about Final Crisis and what Grant puts in, but the one thing he certainly does is puts so many ideas, so many concepts, so much originality on every page. And literally, I think the hard part is deciphering all the way through, because every single panel seems to have some level of meaning, not just what's taking place in the overarching story, but things that can play out in the past and in the future. So, like I said, it's one of those things that you have to sit back and read and enjoy, and that's a good thing. You know, for the price of comics these days, you don't want to just browse through it and be done in 2 minutes. This is a read that you can have over and over again and find a little bit more each time you go through it.
Excellent. I'm sorry I missed DC Nation, but again, if I can slip into Dan for a second, I'll give you 4 words for a great new title. Bring him back. Dial H4 Hero. Robbie Reed needs to come back now. I thought Pfeiffer did a great job when he brought it back in Hero.
Yeah, he did a lot of fun with it. And actually, the funny part about it, you're going to see some Dial H.
No kidding.
Yeah, actually, in Brave and Bold when Straczynski takes over. He's a bit of a fan, too.
Oh, excellent. And hey, by the way, congratulations getting the MLJ Heroes. I'm a huge fan of those Golden Age Heroes, and they are this blank slate that you can build on.
And the good part is I was checking my emails this morning, and I got the breakdowns for all the heroes and the stories for the first 4 characters to be launching with this idea from Joe this weekend. I mean, he's in. I think he's in London right now for the British Academy Awards. But he still had time to send me some information on this, so I'm excited as hell about it. Yeah?
I don't know why you're blowing off the New York Comic Con for the BAFTAs, Joe, but I guess okay, fine. You know, you were up in our skybox earlier, and I know you talked about some.
Anyway.
Oh, good. Then
that could have been you.
Well, then good. Then we got a good chance to do this here on the floor. So it was a good chance to talk to Dan. I know you talked to Alex in your office.
Yes.
And you took a lot of 20 questions, and you did a very good job.
Thank you.
It was very Edward R. Murrow, person to person, like watching you do the mailbag.
Yes, without the cigarettes.
But is there anything? I mean, I know we got Blackest Night coming up, and we've got like you said, Joe on Brave and Bold. But are there any other stories that you're excited about that haven't gotten the headlines?
There's exciting things happening, and we got a slow burn on the Superman stories, but still a lot going on with World of New Krypton. I think you're going to see an interesting story take place in JSA with Black Adam and the Captain Marvel family that brings some finality to the Captain Marvel family story, kind of in an interesting way.
Okay.
And I think you're going to be seeing some exciting stuff with Justice League with Dwayne. Dwayne's actually setting down his cast of characters, and we're going to be tackling some tough subjects with Justice League. So again, some new stuff coming down the pike. We're always going to be pushing. We're always going to be trying new things, and it keeps us excited, and hopefully the fans too.
Okay, one more idea for a one-shot. How about the Super Pets in like a Westminster type of setting, and they're all out being shown? Here's Comet, the horse, Streaky the cat. Look how great they are.
Absolutely. If you dress up like Beppo, we got an idea.
I as you told me earlier, I am built like Batmite,
okay.
Which I will take as a compliment from Dan DiDio. Dude, thanks for your time. And always, as I always say, you're very kind to tolerate my impression as opposed to imitation.
It's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it.
It's done with respect, and it really is. Now, keep it up, man. Great stuff. Thanks a lot.
There you go, Dan DiDio from 2009. Like I said, I had subsequent conversations with him off the record at bar time, downtime at conventions. He's good friends with my buddies Art and Franco, so that kind of allowed me the chance to kind of see him a little more socially and just hang out. I like Dan, and I really hope for the best for him. I hope he lands at a position that he's happy with in media in some fashion. Hey, I like Axel Alonso, and I'm not saying Axel did everything right in Marvel, but I'm really happy he landed at AWA. As far as, being back in the comic book biz, and I really look forward to talking to him about his new position, and hopefully down the road when Dan has some time to relax. I don't think this is the best time to talk to a person when they get fired. I've certainly been fired before, and sometimes you're just not happy with yourself, and it's tough, man. I mean, we've all been through it. That's part of life. So I'm gonna give Dan his space. But much like Jeff Loeb, I really hope to talk to these guys in the future when a little more time passes and they can reflect back, as other great comic book publishers and editors-in-chief are able to look back at their run and also comment on what's happening today. Dan DiDio, celebrating Word Balloon 15 with a bunch of Dan DiDio conversations. I hope you enjoyed it. Today it was brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners and your great support via Patreon, patreon.com/wordballoon. If you want to subscribe to Word Balloon, if you can, and want to support the cause, I do appreciate it. Thank you greatly, League of Word Balloon listeners. Word Balloon also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. Great stuff coming, man. I keep talking about it. Stephanie Phillips, Artemis and the Assassins, coming in just a couple weeks in March. We also enjoyed the debut of John Layman's hilarious The Man Who Fucked Up Time, Zach Thompson's Undone by Blood, God Killers from Mark Sable, and hey, there's also great books coming, new chapters of Animosity from Marguerite Bennett and Baby Teeth with Donnie Cates, Garth Ennis books at Aftershock, including A Walk Through Hell. Lots of other great books as well from some of my favorite people in comics, from Paul Jenkins and Cullen Bunn to Phil Hester and Tim Seeley. Go to their website. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages, and how to get to these stories digitally or using the diamond codes to order them through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Thanks again for listening to Word Balloon. We are wrapping up February. There's still more conversation to come before we say bye-bye to February. We got that extra day, the 29th, Superman's birthday for us old school comic fans. Not the publishing date, but back when they used to publish the DC calendar and you would literally have days of, hey, it's Wildcat's birthday. Hey, it's it's Hal Jordan's birthday. It's Alan Scott's birthday. February 29th. I believe Batman was also technically February 29th, but I know for a fact it's definitely Superman's birthday. So I'll be celebrating. I hope you will too. And again, if you're going to C2E2, I certainly hope I have the chance to meet you and thank you personally for what you've done in terms of supporting Word Balloon through listening to Word Balloon or subscribing via Patreon. Please let me know and give me the chance to thank you personally. I'm going to be wearing rubber gloves. I'm sorry, I'm a little paranoid with this corona stuff. It just popped up in Italy, for Christ's sake. So I'm not taking any chances, but please don't take it personally if when you shake my hand or attempt to shake my hand, I'm wearing rubber gloves. I've still got a box of them when I got recovered from my infection, so I may as well use them just to kind of as a preventive measure when we're swimming around the petri dish that is known as C2E2. Really looking forward to seeing everybody this weekend. Until next time, thank you. Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2020.